one last discussion about equilibrium before we start moving on to problem-solving strategies, is that of stability. So there are three types of equilibrium. You can have stable equilibrium, unstable equilibrium, or neutral equilibrium. And stable equilibrium is simply when you displace an object, that object tries to return to the equilibrium position. So any disturbances that affect the system or the object wants to go back to equilibrium. So of course, this is a very desirable equilibrium when you're building a building. When you're building a building and a wind gust comes and hits your building, you don't want your building to topple over. You want your building to return to its equilibrium position. Or a bridge, right? As cars drive over it, a suspension bridge, putting weight down, you don't want that slight displacement to affect the equilibrium. You don't want the bridge to fall over. Now there's unstable equilibrium, which states that, again, an object is displaced, a force attempts to push the object away from equilibrium. Not incredibly desirable from an engineering perspective, and I'll give a simple example of this in a moment. And then finally, neutral equilibrium, which just means that a displacement doesn't affect the equilibrium of the object one way or the other. The object doesn't immediately fall apart because of the displacement. A force doesn't attempt to tear it apart, but nor does a force come and try to maintain the equilibrium. So simple examples of equilibrium. Stable equilibrium, a marble in the bottom of a bowl. Any displacement of the marble, that marble wants to go back to the center bottom of the bowl. No matter how many times you knock that marble about, assuming it's a reasonable force, you don't crack the bowl, the marble will return to the bottom of the bowl. That is a stable equilibrium. Unstable equilibrium, flip the bowl over and try to balance the marble on top of the bottom of the bowl. So now your bowl is inverted, you have a spherical surface, but there are enough imperfections that you might be able to get a marble to balance on the top of that bowl. If it does balance, that's equilibrium. It's not accelerating, that marble sits there, but any tiny displacement of that marble will cause the marble to fall off. Gravity will push that marble off if you displace it even a little bit. That is an unstable equilibrium. And an example of a neutral equilibrium is just a marble on a flat piece of floor, right? Pick the marble up, displace it, move it somewhere else, its equilibrium is unaffected. It's not, it might be in equilibrium, it might not, but there are no forces acting to actively return it to equilibrium or force it away from equilibrium. That is neutral equilibrium. So these are the three types of equilibrium that you can have. Again, in engineering, stable is far more desirable. And if you've ever played the game Jenga, you go from a fairly stable equilibrium where little tiny bumps on that stack of blocks. A little tiny bump doesn't really cause it to topple over, but eventually it gets precarious enough that a tiny bump will cause it to fall.